guys, what's up? This is McAllister's podcast. I'm your host, always Coleman McAllister. We have a wonderful, lovely episode today. Before we get into anything, I kind of wanted to do a little bit, I don't even know if you would call it housekeeping, just kind of wanted to discuss, I guess just discuss an issue that I wonder if any of you guys can relate to, or maybe I'm just crazy. I have a feeling that I'm just crazy. But you know, I've been struggling a lot really over the last couple of years. I wonder if some of it has to do with, some of my personal, journeys with like sobriety, or, not drinking, or staying away from pornography, staying away from cannabis the last couple months. I don't know if it has to do with that. I don't know if it just has to do with general mental health issues or general trauma or whatnot, but I have always had a very difficult time separating myself emotionally from what's going on politically. Not even really what's going on politically, but people's political opinions or how they view the world. I have a very hard time looking at people who have a different point of view, who will even, and there's levels to this, right? There's people who will actually have the discussion. I already have a lot more respect for that person. If you're willing to have the discussion, if you're willing to actually engage with the points I'm making, or the points that are there, whatever, there's a big difference between that and the person who just says fuck you and just doesn't talk to you about it, right? Or is just unwilling to have a good faith conversation. But regardless, I have such a hard time really looking at these people genuinely. And people who I don't even have the conversation with. People who I just know from what they've discussed or what they've posted, like this is what they believe. And I just have a hard, I think a lot of it too is because I am radicalized. I am both an anarchist and an atheist. And these are very like zero sum positions, right? Like, from the atheist perspective, there is no God, right? Or at the very least, there is minimal to no evidence of God. And all the evidence, is overwhelmingly in the other direction. And there's anarchism, which is essentially the belief that anytime there's a government or somebody's inflicting force on you, that is illegitimate. Similarly to if a child is like dating or in a romantic relationship, either physically or emotionally, with an older man or woman or whatever, or the relationship to slave and slave owner. These are all things that are illegitimate. I would consider the relationship to government to citizen also illegitimate. And, I think the religious stuff, it kind of tends to be, I feel like that in particular is something that I've fought against for so long that like I'm almost burnt out. Like if somebody is religious, I kind of just write them off in my mind. And, maybe this will happen with enough years of doing the political stuff, but the anarchism, specifically I've been a libertarian probably since 2019. I was always a conservative, considered myself a Republican. I registered for the Republican Party when I turned 18, which was over 12 years ago. And I had always had that viewpoint steadfast. Although ironically around the time, like I wasn't religious. Like I don't know if I was necessarily considered myself an atheist yet, but I definitely was straying away from the religious aspect. But I still believe that those conservative ideas and conservative viewpoints were important. So right off the gate, that was like something that I always had trouble with. And I think this is kind of just the theme with those two ideas that I have, is like they tend to not mesh very well. They tend to collide a lot. Whenever I talk to people who are either in the anarchist camp or the atheist camp. There's always something about that idea, like not even the ideologies, but like the people who represent those. If I get too in depth into conversation with them, or if I just hear their points of view on other things, I just tend to disagree, and I really just it bothers me. It bothers me more than it should bother me. And I realize this. I realize that it's not good for me to be that emotional about it. And this is something that I've acknowledged about myself, I think, really over the last year, that I'm really trying to work on. I'm really trying to not get so emotionally entangled. However, I think the thing about the opposite of these two ideologies, I guess let me just finish kind of my history of that. So I was a conservative Republican from like 2014 up to like 2019, I would say, maybe 2013. Like, because when I was younger, I definitely shared those same Republican values, you know. But up around 2019, when COVID hit, I think that really that event and situation really radicalized me to becoming a libertarian. That's right around the same time that I started learning about libertarianism. And I think just seeing that play out in the real world, like, it's one thing to, like, I think before that, true government intervention on the people was something that was more kind of an idea. Like, we had wars, but there wasn't really something besides like the war on drugs that like really like affected the citizen in the way that did. But when COVID happened, there were police officers arresting people for, you know, going to parks and like trying to keep their business afloat, right? Like, there were people that were literally getting thrown in a cell for that. And it really showed me like, oh, this is the extent that the government will, you know, put force on its own people, not because it actually cares about whether it's what they're doing is right or wrong, even if they believe that what the core value, what they're doing is the fact that they have a directive, they have an order, and they're going to just do it. Right. So I think that's around the time I got radicalized into libertarianism. I think about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I really became like a full-blown anarchist. And I've talked about this before, but like what really led me from becoming a libertarian to an anarchist, I think the thing that prevented me for a long time was like what to do with the kids, or like things like murder, like the real like capital offenses that like everyone would agree, like, yeah, this is wrong. Somebody murder somebody rape something. Like, I think I had the minarchist view where it's like we need someone to deal with that, to delegate that, right? But I think just over years and years of thinking about it and really understanding, like, you know, what actually happens, like when somebody gets arrested for murder, like it's not true that like they all like get their, you know, quote unquote justice or quote unquote what they deserve. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, the elite, the hierarchy still plays out in that capacity. And it's at the expense of the taxpayer. So I think that those ideas kind of tended to just devolve for me, and then I just kind of became a full-blown atheist or anarchist. The atheism, I think, just came from just my upbringing and just seeing, you know, the true horrors of what religion really, what happens in putting into practice, and also just the community that I grew up in, how so many things would happen that were just, and they're just countless examples of this, of people wielding religious power and really abusing it. And similarly to politics, how people will just look the other way because it's more comfortable to be religious. It's more comfortable to have, quote unquote, the answers for the afterlife, right? So I guess that's where I'm coming from in terms of like That's the journey that brought me to those two conclusions, both being an anarchist and being an atheist. Now, I think, especially for the anarchist side of me, when I am discussing or debating certain issues, I guess aside from that, I have always been someone that has a very strong moral compass. Ever since I was a kid, when I saw something that was happening that I believe is wrong, not even morally, just factually, I was always quick to point it out, and I was always quick to be steadfast and say, like, no, I'm not going to go with the grain. This isn't right. I've lost countless friends. I was excluded from countless groups because of this. I felt like it was a big part of why I was picked on growing up and bullied growing up. And that's just me. There are a lot of days that I kind of wish I could be that. Like, it would be really easy. Like, I can imagine how easy it would be to just say, hey, okay, this is wrong, but I'm going to just say it's right because it's comfortable. I'm not talking about like a threatening situation. I'm not talking about like somebody is pointing at like what the Jordan Peterson thing where it's like somebody's pointing a gun to your head and you like lie to save yourself. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just purely like social situations or with friends or whatever. And you know, that's something that continued into adulthood. I feel like over in my adult life, I have lost connections and lost friends with a lot of people purely over political disagreements, especially over COVID. COVID was a big one where a lot of people that I knew were just kind of in family, who were kind of just, for lack of a better term, like the normies, right? Like they were first in line to get the shot. They were like, oh, we're just going to get the shot because the government says that it's the good thing to do. Don't want to kill grandma, right? But like for someone like me who was like, okay, you know, this isn't even a vaccine. This is mRNA gene technology. You know, I was listening to a lot of podcasts about it and doing a lot of research about it. And I was like, this is just not what it seems. And I was somebody, when COVID first hit, I was very terrified of it. I was like, oh my God, this is something that's going to really fuck everybody up. Fucked a lot of people up. I'm not saying it didn't, but it definitely was not what the government sold it to be. So I have a real problem. I guess all this ranting, and we're going to get to some actual stuff that's been going on, but I have a very hard time taking people at face value, taking people genuinely, especially if I explain to them and tell them like, hey, you know what? Here's the simple moral fact is that like I said before, the relationship between citizen and government is illegitimate. Taxation is theft. That's a big one. Taxation is theft. That's just such like a simple, like you can go through it logically and just see, just like, okay, I use this example all the time, but like if someone is holding a gun to your head and saying, pull money out of an ATM machine, and they say like, I'm going to take this money from you, but it's going to go to poor people or it's going to go to people who need it. It doesn't really matter. You're still stealing money. It's still involuntary. It's still wrong. It's still morally wrong. And it's really hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that somebody can understand that. Because people have to understand. I mean, I just don't understand. Like, it's one thing if I am not one to explain to them or this is something that they don't understand. But when I've explained that to them, they just ignore that. I have a very, very, very extremely hard time thinking that they are a genuine person, that they are not two-faced, that they actually care, that what they want is just their bottom end. And these are always, I mean, I'm not going to say for everyone, but 95% of the time, these are people who they themselves profit off of that same system. They have children who they get tax benefits from. and or they're on some kind of welfare or support. They go to public schools because, they can't afford it, and that's understandable. But, you don't they don't understand that, well, A, education is so devalued. Who even fucking needs it these days? We have fucking AI and Grok. And B, it's just, it's the same system as Medicaid or whatever government type of thing, right? It's free to you in a sense, not really because you're still paying taxes, but like it is more advantageous to you than someone who is not in that system. And just like the situation with the ATM, somebody holding a gun to the person pulling money out of an ATM machine, that is wrong. And I guess what I'm talking about, and if you have an understanding of this or have some knowledge to drop, please drop in the comments. I'm not saying that sarcastically or like in any kind of prodding way. Like I truly want to understand the justification for that. I have such a hard time with that. I feel like there are people in my life that I have truly just taken out of my life, really pushed them away, whether it's online debates or just even getting into messages in person, having, debates on the podcast, like people who just, they are steadfast with this opinion and they just tell themselves like, it's okay to steal from people. It's okay to steal from people because it helps. Even though it doesn't really, like if you look like 5 steps, it's like, it doesn't really help. It helps the people at the top. It's a way for the elite to keep getting their shit right. One of the things that was so genius about the Rothschilds is they were the first family. This isn't like me getting into like Jewish conspiracies or anything, but like just factually, they were the first family or the first people with wealth who figured out, you know what is going to help me continue to get that wealth in a way that no free market can? Put it into the government. And that's what they did. And that's what people are still doing to this day. The thing is, the people in government have no accountability. The people in the free market have more. It's not perfect. It's not utopian. But I would rather live in a world that is moral, where it's like the old saying, like, the ends justify the means. A lot of people in this same pro-government sphere, and a lot of it too is because they grew up in that same public school system, or even the private school system. A lot of it's, it's not truly private in my mind, quote unquote private system, especially with this whole Reynolds thing. But like, people will just think, because of the narrative with all these wars or whatever, like we dropped nukes on Japan and that was really shitty, but it created a more moral and just world, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. Like, I don't care. And the difference is, if a businessman were to take advantage of people and to do those same cruddy things, I'm not saying that's okay. But that's the big difference, right? I'm saying that neither of these things are okay. And the other party is saying that one of them is okay. And I have a very big problem with that. And I get the other side, the other explanation of it, where it's like, these businesses will just have so much power that nothing can stop them. Go through history. The times that the government has more power than the business, abuses more power than the business, it's tenfold. Government does way more. Governments start wars. Businesses start conflicts. There's it's just not even the same. I guess my point is, and the religious stuff frustrates me too, but I can at least kind of, there's almost like a naivete about it, or almost like a low IQ thing about it. But I think it's different because like when you're arguing with religious people, the arguments are so low IQ that it's like, I can't even. And the thing it happens sometimes with government discussions too, but I feel like more often than not, when I'm talking to people about politics, I know that they're smarter than the person who I'm arguing with religion. And the government stuff is like, it's just more logical. And my point is just as the same as somebody were to art, like if the evil corporate businessman was doing something that was really fucked up, like if I was just to sit here and say, oh, well, it's okay that he does that because I believe in capitalism, like I would be just as two-faced, right? But in that scenario, I would say, like, you know, there's at least some kind of accountability for that. Like in a free market, in a truly, if there's no government in this fantasy world where there is no government, people would be able to see that and make decisions. There would be people that would say, hey, like, I'm not going to shop at your store. Or even if it's like a situation where they own multiple things in a community, it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to leave your community. When it happens with the government, there is no accountability. You could say, oh, well, you can vote. Really? You can cast one vote every 1, 2, 4 years. But what does that do? You don't get to vote on the issues. You don't get to vote on all the people that person in power then, you know, hires and has to do their bidding. Look what happened with Trump. Everybody who voted MAGA, like, how many of them have been, like, vocally and gravely disappointed by what has happened with the Epstein stuff, with Iran, giving more weapons to Ukraine? How many of them voted for that? Not very many. It's just, and so I guess to wrap this all up, I have such a hard time with this. And I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to do a better job at like really taking apart my own ego and really trying to see the other side, really trying to understand where these people are coming from. But it's hard because I think at the end of the day, people just are emotional about it. They're not logical. And I think a big part of the reason why they're emotional is because they profit off that same system. Or maybe they don't even profit off it, but that's how they live. And that makes sense. And I wish I wish I was more sympathetic to that. But I'm not. I'm just not, because it's wrong. I'm going to have more sympathy for the person who acts morally and is in a worse state. Like if they deny Medicaid, if they deny these food stamps, and then they are worse off than the people who do, I have a ton of sympathy for that person. I have an enormous amount of sympathy for that person. I do not have sympathy for the person who takes advantage of those government programs. Not only that, justifies it. I can understand, like, you know, if you have kids and this is like all you can do, but you understand that's wrong. I can wrap my head around that. I can't wrap my head around the idea of you're going to justify it. And these are people that I love. These are people that I care about. These are people who I consider friends and family. But when I see them have these points of view, it's really hard for me to look at them in a good light. It's really hard for me to look at them in a way that says you are a genuine person. You are not two-faced. There are truly points in my life over the last year, 2 years, where I've wanted to shut every single person I know besides my partner out of my life. Like, I've wanted to burn every single fucking bridge that I have because this stuff enrages me. It boils my blood. I don't know how much of that is trauma. I don't know how much of that is the environment that I grew up in. I don't know. I have no fucking clue. But I guess I just wanted to talk about this today because I'm just curious if anybody out there feels the same. I just wonder if anyone else looks at these things that are happening, looks at people posting about it, looks at people's opinions, And I understand people are different online than in person. That's part of it too, I guess. But I guess I wonder if anyone has had these same kind of struggles. Because I'm telling you, man, it's really hard for me to want to interact with people and to have friends and to do all those things when that's such a barrier. Okay, let's talk about some news. Some things going on in the world. I think it's going to be kind of a longer episode today, honestly, especially with this cat. Opie, shut the fuck up. Okay, this is the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm a little behind on some of this stuff. Something else I wanted to mention before we start. I am going to just start doing one episode a week. A big part of that is because of the reasons I just said. It's just emotionally draining. I think we're just going to do one episode every Monday, and I think on Wednesday, Thursdays, we're going to do a live stream. Maybe if something really crazy or big happens, I'll do another podcast, but for the majority of the rest, or at least for the foreseeable future, I'm going to see, it's probably just going to be one episode every Monday and then another one or two game streams later in the week. So I'm trying to keep the content more casual. With that though, I do have some like projects that I think we're going to work on, some more history-based, religion-based type of things going on in the background. So stay tuned for that. Okay, let's get into this first story. This happened July 8th, so 4 days from when we're recording. We're recording this Saturday. It's going to drop Monday, like I said. A kid with no record, quote, 20-year-old Iowa man detained by ICE deported to Guatemala. Pascal Pedro, a 20-year-old construction worker and West Liberty High School graduate, was deported sometime July 6th or 7th to the country he fled from as a teenager. He was deported just days after the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials detained him. His attorney, Tim Farmer, said. He met with immigration officials at their Cedar Rapids office July 1st for a routine check-in appointment. Now, I'll just say this. If anybody's like an illegal immigrant and they're listening to this, do not do what he did. Don't check in with your fucking... Don't do it. Don't do it, okay? They're going to fucking deport you. If you're here and like you're not someone who's like a criminal or someone who's like a really nefarious person, like stay the fuck away from ICE, man. Like stay the fuck away. Not to like make fun of this person at all, because I mean this is a very unfortunate circumstance, but I mean if you keep reading the article, he immigrated, just sum it up. He immigrated here in 2018 from Guatemala. He was a refugee, from what I understand. The article didn't specifically say whether he was like officially, like if he had actually like registered as a refugee or how that exactly works, but he is considered a refugee from that country. One of the things that I was talking with this book I just read, Not Sick of Winning by Michael Mouse, which describes the first 100 days of office in the first 100 days of Trump's second term. One of the things that he talks about is he kind of just talks about like how, there's a big difference between the people who were here 4+ years ago and the people who kind of just came in when basically Biden just lifted up the floodgates, right? I think there's a fair argument to that. I still think in that case you should target people who are like, dangerous criminals or doing really nefarious things. I think that should have just been the starting point for ICE. Not going into Home Depot and rounding up everybody who's illegal. Not going after people like Pascal Pedro, who, from all accounts, is a very kind person in the community. Was a very, he was a construction worker. He, you see the picture right here. He played soccer. He was a part of his community, not a bad person, right? And I think, a lot of times people who are pro deportation will like acknowledge this, but they'll kind of be flippant about like, yeah, but he should have come illegally. It's especially surprising for like libertarians and ANCAP types, where it's like I look, like I said, if you want to make the argument that like these violent people should be getting out, fine, but like what? Because somebody didn't get a piece of paper you're going to just say they should just automatically be deported. Like, I just don't agree with that. Like and we're going to talk about one of these articles later, but like, Trump is actually reconsidering in the ag industry, really, toning down a lot of the illegal restrictions because people are finally acknowledging like, hey, like that actually really helps our economy, having illegal work. And, it's all mutual. It's, these people, they go to work, they work for a fee, and they work for a fee that's affordable for everyone, and everyone's happy, right? And it's the government who isn't happy because they don't get to tax them. Anyways, this is the dark side of deportation. I get the argument, like in the big beautiful bill, Trump wants to, continue construction of the wall. I think that's fine. I don't think he needs $45 billion to do it, but whatever. That's at least like a step in the right direction. I'm okay with border security. If you want to say, hey, we're cutting it off, you're not going to come in unless you do ABC, I'm okay with that. I don't agree with the next step into where you are like, okay, we're going to go into our communities, people who have jobs, people who, a lot of times they actually do pay taxes, surprisingly, even though they easily couldn't, right? Or like, just people who actually do benefit the community, people who are not like, gang affiliated or mobsters or, participating in selling drugs that are released with fent or whatever, right? Or just bad substances, whatever. I don't necessarily super agree in the whole drug thing, but whatever. I think it would be naive to say that there isn't some kind of malicious force behind the drug market, right? The black drug market. But this is just something that I think people need to consider. If you support these mass deportation type of things, this is going to be the result. This is always going to be the result. It's like, this reminds me kind of like what they tried in New York, where years ago it was the stop and frisk thing, and New York was under a lot of scrutiny for this. I believe this is New York. They were under a lot of scrutiny for this, so then they decided, okay, we're just going to charge violent criminal, or like we're just going to focus on violent offenses. And they were actually unable to stay afloat. They were not able to get enough, like money or whatever. Like it just wasn't, and it didn't have enough value. So then they had to then go to nonviolent offenses just to keep the whole thing afloat. I think that's very telling in a way, right? Like, in a free market, if bad shit's happening and you're going to hire private security or whatever, like, that's it, right? Like, that's the exchange. But when you have this big government bubble thing, right, where it's like, okay, we're just going to take care of crime, it never just stops at the point where it's intended to. It always goes a step further because because there are people with paychecks behind that. Like, they have to justify where they're at. Kind of staying on this topic, I kind of thought about, when I grew up in small town Iowa, there were a couple different kids that I went to school with who were illegal immigrants. And they were, for the most part, they were good people. They participated in class. They were actually fairly intelligent. One of them I know, he actually did end up taking the test and became legal. So I hope he's okay. But, I hate this picture that these Republican types will paint where they really, it almost turns into a racist thing, right? Where you really look at people of a different nationality, people who do contribute a lot to society, and you're going to cast them all aside because they don't have a card. Because they don't have a little card that they put in their wallet. Because people can't learn to drive without that, right? People couldn't figure out how to sit behind a car and drive without that, right? That's impossible. Anyways, so that, and I think protests actually have happened in the Cedar Rapids area because of that. Again, you guys know how I feel about protesting, but like, it is very clear that there are a lot of people in this community who are riled up. And, I think people will make the argument a lot of times that, like, people do want the illegal immigration issue to be solved. Like, we don't want like a pouring in of people. I think that might be fair to an extent. I don't think what those people are wanting is this. I don't think they want a situation like Pedro over here. Okay, let's go to the next article, the next bit of info. Like I said, I think this is gonna be a longer episode, guys. So nitrate levels drop in Des Moines and the Raccoon Rivers, but watering ban remains in effect for now. Now, if you scroll down the article, they do say that there's a standard that they want to have be set. Let me scroll down here. Like, there's a certain level where when they consider it to be at that level, it'll hit. And, interesting enough, like, something else that this article revealed is that, I think a lot of people kind of just played it out as, people were dumping chemicals into the water. And it actually looks like from this article that a lot of it was just because of heavy rain level that the whatever they put in the plants, the killer or whatever, I can't think of the word. Whatever that is, ran off and then went into the river, and that is what spiked the nitrate levels. So I think a lot of like lefties will say like, oh, these farmers, these businesses pumped all these chemicals into the water, and that's not actually what happened. Yes, maybe they should have been more careful with how much they put on or what. You can make that argument, but like, it's not as black and white as that. Yeah, and that actually says that in that article. The ban. Let's see. The ban needs to continue because of the decline with the temporary result of heavy rainstorms in northern Iowa that dumped 3 to 5 inches in some areas over the July 4th weekend and diluted the nitrate into so that's actually why it diluted. Okay. So, and they said later, and they said later Tuesday that the nitrate levels were again beginning to climb, registering at 11.27 milligrams per liter in the Raccoon River and 10.09 in the Des Moines River on Wednesday. So from what I understand, okay. No, not here. I don't know where it is. But it does kind of logically make sense in a way. Like, yes, it's lowered, but like, it's basically, it's a constant juggling act, right? Like they're trying to, keep up or like, measure out with what the rain levels are and also what people are consuming, etc. All that aside, I've talked about this a lot of times in the podcast, so we'll keep this short, but this is classic government. Classic government. We are going to give the public entities the access because they're on our team. And the private people, we're going to keep restrictions on them. I'll be curious to see how long these restrictions last. I truly will. I don't know. They could last throughout the summer. They could last into the coming years, right? And you can say, oh, well, why do people need to water their lawns anyways? Because it's their right. Because it's their property. And, if there was another private option, if this was a free market type of thing, you could have water shipped from another state and have that be watered. You could, have a company say like, hey, even if it's like not a fully private thing, even if there are multiple avenues that are then connected to the public water, say like, oh, hey, this company, our nitrate levels are a little high, so we're going to prevent that. I will say one of the things that I did find hopeful about this was that I guess there is a difference between the water that's used to water your lawns and the drinking water. So they're not cutting off drinking water, which, thank God, that would be atrocious. But look, I still think that this is another example of government overreach. And again, like I've said many times, I can't help but think that the government entities that were in place here could not have told us this sooner and could, maybe have prevented a lot of this. Maybe if the government entities had said like, hey, the nitrate levels are kind of climbing, they're at this rate, and then maybe the farmers could have reacted. And just like, okay, I'm not going to put fertilizer. That was the name. I'm not going to put as much fertilizer on or whatever. Hey, there's going to be a lot of water. Farmers, don't try not to put this much, try to minimize your fertilizer. Okay, I'll do that. But because of the corruption, that communication was limited. Okay. Couple different things today, guys. It's been, that's kind of the thing when you do this once a week, a lot builds up. All right, this is something that I found very disturbing, and I think it kind of ties into the whole topic of, privatization public really well. And I think this is a good backdrop for the last topic we just covered. The state considers hiring private company to provide health care in the Iowa prison system. An Iowa Department of Corrections official confirmed Tuesday the department is issuing a request for proposal to contract with a private company for healthcare services in state prisons, though the state has not made a final decision on pursuing such a contract. Now, this is interesting because, as much as I talk about how good privatization is, how I wish, everything, in a free world that everything would be privatized. This is probably the one example where I heavily object to privatization. Look, the fact that it's healthcare isn't quite the same as having privately owned prisons, but it's a dangerous step. And similarly to how if somebody owned a slave, yes, that's technically a private. In a sense, it's a private thing, right? Like that person who owns that slave isn't necessarily connected to the government. They're if we're going to take it to the example in the South, right? People did privately own slaves. That doesn't mean that was right. You know what I mean? And similarly to how, the prison system has its own batch of slaves. You can say, oh, well, they deserve to be there. Really, the people who nonviolently had drugs or happened to own a weapon, those people, you're really telling me that those people, it's justified for them to be in there? I just disagree. I just think that's wrong. So, this is the majority of the people who make up the prison system. And then we have something that's happening right now where the healthcare industry is being, cut and devalued, not because it's it doesn't have as much value or not that it's getting undercut, but in this prison system specifically, I truly believe it's because it doesn't have the value that it does. There's a reason they don't have the money, and it's because it's a shit system. And it shouldn't have that. The prison system should not have that much money. They should not have enough money to have all these healthcare people that are getting paid, however much, 5, 6 figures, 6, 7 figures, just to it keeps a system that is wrong and morally illegitimate. It keeps it afloat, right? And you're using taxpayer dollars for that. It's bad all around. Now we have an option where you're similar to the whole thing with education, right? Where Rob Sand correctly points out we're giving public money to private schools. That's not right. Similarly, in this situation, you have a public institution giving money to a private institution. That is like, in my mind, that is like the further step from like, public corruption, government corruption. Not to say that they're necessarily on par, but like, similarly to like how corporations get grants and welfare during, times of economic strife, or like they just have like a better placeholder, like they have a better step up in the market, and then the government just fuels that. This same thing is happening right now in the prison system, and I cannot stress how dangerous my idea this is. I think the correct moral approach to this would be, if you want to keep your institution valid, maybe stop arresting everybody for smoking weed. Maybe stop throwing people in jail for having a weapon that's not registered. Maybe start there. Maybe start there before hiring out to a private entity who can then benefit from that, and then, like we were talking about with the Rothschilds, like use that government position to then further themselves immorally. This is dangerous on so many levels. I really, really, really hope that citizens can learn about this. This was something too that like kind of got brushed under the rug. Like I feel like with all the the big beautiful bill stuff and the deportation stuff, which are valid and important, like this is kind of something that just fell under the rug. Because it's prison, right? Like these prisoners, they deserve to be there, right? It's scare tactics. Don't do anything wrong, right? That's what we're all about. Ridiculous. No, I'm gonna say right now, like people who do this, people who need this, not even need it, but like people who are in the system, like they shouldn't be there for things that are nonviolent. Let's actually just scrolling down. Let's look at this. While Iowa has been a sizable surplus over several years, Republicans at the Iowa State House are planning to use those funds in part to finance the implementation of recent tax cuts. Oh no, this is from the 1.8 billion surplus. And then they approved a $9.425 billion budget, spending more than the projected $8.5 billion in revenue. So, this is just from, and this is something that I think Rob Sand actually, in his career has done a good job, like pointing out, right? Like the abuse of spending in Iowa State. The solution is not to sell out or market out to private institutions for healthcare. What should really happen is we should cut back. Hey, like I said, maybe we shouldn't be arresting people for nonviolent crimes. Maybe we should really dial back our approach in law enforcement and our approach in prisons, in the prison system, instead of just going the private option. Okay, I think I got one more thing locally before we actually, this isn't even really worth it, but because I already mentioned that Kim Reynolds wants to basically step in to talk about how they want to maybe open up illegal labor in agriculture. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about today then, more federally and big news. Maybe we should start the episode out with this stuff because it's pretty big. We'll make a clip it later. It doesn't matter. So there, as everybody knows, this last week, I didn't really want to pull up any clips or anything because everybody's probably seen them by now. The clips of Pam Bondi and Trump, really just, denying the existence of a client list. We already talked about this last episode too, but denying a client list. Not only that, but Trump saying, why are we even talking about it? Someone who is, like we said, obviously was friends with Epstein and is probably on the list. Two people who have really, fallen under criticism for their cover up. Dan Bongino and Kash Patel may be stepping down from their positions, which is pretty huge. I'm not going to lie. So this first article. FBI's Dan Bongino, this is from Axios. FBI's Dan Bongino clashes with Attorney General Bondi over handling of Epstein files. Apparently, he did not show up. Bongino did not come to work Friday, leading some insiders to believe that he had quit. But administration officials say he's still in the job, even as internal tension over the Epstein case continues. In reading the article, basically from what I understood to be happening, was that essentially he and Pam Bondi got into it Wednesday of this last week and had a big blowing up about it. And he did not show up to work. Like the article said, he did not show up to work that Friday. It still seems like he is in the position he's in for now. But I think someone who, got a lot of flack, rightfully so, for, not being more stand up about this, who kind of just seemed to go along with the flow of being like, he killed himself. Everybody by now has seen the video where he and Kash Patel are basically, they seem like hostages. The fact that he, and actually let's look at this other article. FBI Chief Kash Patel may resign over Epstein files fallout report. He may consider stepping down from his position, reportedly in solidarity with Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who had a fallout with Pam Bondi. Yeah. So it seems like they are both finally stepping over the line and potentially doing the right thing. Now, I think this is something that, people could argue, why didn't they do this in the first place, right? But look, I think as with any government action, when it starts to go into the right direction, that's a benefit, that's a positive. And you kind of have to, as much criticism as is valid for what those people did initially, I think to then come back around and say, hey, we fucked up. I'm not going to stand with this institution. I'm going to step down. I think that's admirable in a sense. I do think that's better than going the other way, right? It's better than going the direction that Pam Bondi and Donald Trump seem to be going, which is deny. What list? This didn't happen, right? Look, I mean, they still took money from these organizations, and that's problematic. I really kind of wonder and wish if some of the money that they have made from that, they would consider donating that in some capacity, or maybe even just putting it into something that really can continue to push for this information to be released. I think I heard somebody talking about this the other day. Like, I think it is very likely that we can just expect that we probably will never know this information, right? Like to its conclusion. But I think the fact that these things are happening, it is a positive. This is honestly just the beautiful thing about technology. I think it's the thing that's really beautiful about the day and age we live in is we live in a time, more than any other time in U.S. history, where the American people can actually plainly see when the government's fucking them over. And a lot of it is because of the internet. And this whole thing with Jeffrey Epstein it's a candle. It is really like putting a light to the corruption of government. And I think these are the steps, when people really think about or look at, what's happening in government, what's happened, like, how is this institution screwing us over? Talking in the beginning about the person who just, stands by the state, stands by the government actions, stands by these government programs because it helps their end. I think when you look at things like Epstein, I think I want to believe that there's a bigger chance that person can then start to step away from that ideology. When they look at, this is what government is actually about. Protecting their own interests, protecting the people that are powerful, that are connected to them, so that they do not suffer the same consequences that they give to the little man every day. State of Iowa, someone smokes a joint walking down the street, they can get however much time, right? Depending on what number of convictions that is for them, because I think you have like a 3-strike rule or something before you get 2 years. But I mean, these people who were involved in a pedo ring, the government will just cover for them in the most obvious and disingenuous way possible, denying that the list even exists. It would have been, I don't understand why they didn't just say like there wasn't really anything on the list. That would have been at least a little more in line with reality, like a potential reality. Like, okay, we went through this list, we didn't really find anything. Okay, that's bullshit, but like at least that's a story you can sell, right? You can't sell the story that 2 weeks, a month ago, you were talking about how you have all these things on your desk and you're going through them. You have this whole press thing where you give out all these binders of information we already knew, but like this is phase one. This is phase one. And then we're going to keep going. Like, you don't get to do that and then say it didn't exist. It's so unbelievable. It really just shows the ignorance of the state, where they truly think that like we are just idiots. There are plenty of idiots out there. People are not this fucking stupid. The only way people can still go with these kind of things, this administration, is if they are themselves being disingenuous. And I think when these kind of things happen, we could then more clearly see the types of people that are involved in that. Let's just do one more thing before we wrap up. One article that I found that was really very interesting, especially as someone who I got a degree in film. Like I myself understand kind of the idea of metadata, right? So I thought this was super interesting. Metadata shows that the FBI's raw Jeffrey Epstein prison video was likely modified. And I really hate the framing of this article. It really shows where the corporate press is on this. But the United States Department of Justice this week released nearly 11 hours of what is described as full raw surveillance footage from a camera position near Jeffrey Epstein's prison cell the night before he was found dead. The release was intended to address conspiracy theories about Epstein's apparent suicide in federal custody, but instead of putting those suspicions to rest, it may fuel them further. Metadata embedded in the video and analyzed by Wired and independent video forensics experts show that rather than being a direct export from the prison's surveillance system, the footage was modified, likely using the professional editing tool Adobe Premiere Pro, right? What I use. The file appears to have been assembled from at least 2 source clips, saved multiple times, exported, then uploaded to the DOJ's website, where it was presented as raw footage. Holy shit. This is what's so beautiful about technology. And this is what's so beautiful about the government being dumb, the dumb fucks that they are. Modified, assembled from at least 2 source clips, saved multiple times, and exported, and then uploaded. So, 2 key things there. 2 source clips. So that right there, that takes apart the whole theory that like, oh, well, the minute is missing because of the reset. That takes that conspiracy, not conspiracy, but that explanation, that throws that out the window. Saved multiple times. Look, I can tell you as somebody who edits this podcast quite a bit and edits game footage quite a bit and who went to school and edited quite a bit of things. If you have a raw file, let's even make the argument that they had to put it into Premiere Pro to like make it formatable or whatever. You can do that in one session. You can literally do that in one session. You get a source file, Let's say it's even, well, I mean, this is from 2019, so it wouldn't have been the case. But let's even say it was like from a VCR and they had to pull it from the VCR, right? And then they had to put it into Premiere Pro and then upload it, like export and then upload it, right? You can do that all in one sitting. And if you have like a government computer that like is, I'm assuming, able to do this stuff, there's no reason you need to do that. So this is extremely suspicious. I mean, I don't think anybody bought it for a minute, but like when you look at like, oh, this is what the embedded data, essentially the code for the video shows, is that this is not what they're claiming it is. This is not raw footage. And even like if this was them, maybe give that explanation, like, hey, we had to do this, like the file format wasn't right, so we had to whatever, right? Even though you can do that you don't need to put that into Premiere Pro. Like if it was like not in the right setting, you just put that right into Media Encoder, boom. You don't even need to open Premiere Pro. So this whole thing just stinks. This whole thing is fishy. Shocked that they're not doing the right thing. Like I fucking called it weeks ago. Like I'm shocking that they wouldn't give us the real footage, right? I really hope Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, as they step down, if they step down, I really hope that they give some kind of clarity to that. Maybe they can help their image, like bring their image back a little bit, really say like, hey, we were correct, like, colluded with, like we were threatened or whatever into this. Maybe they can really, face the consequences of that and really show that, hey, like we really fucked up. Maybe they'll commit suicide. Who knows? All right. That's it for today. That's the episode. A lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. But, I think my rant in the beginning still holds true. Like, I really hope people just look at some of these events that have been happening and really start to question their own ideology. Like, hey, maybe because these things are happening, maybe I shouldn't trust the government as much as I do. Maybe I shouldn't give all my credence into these government programs. Maybe it's actually all really malicious and bad. And even if I have to suffer for it personally, maybe it's the right thing to do. Okay, guys. And like I said, if you guys have any opinions or anything like that, please drop them in the comments. Like I am genuinely curious to see what people think about kind of my analysis of people in general and what it all goes into this. So, yeah, have a good night, everybody. We will be doing another live stream later this week, probably, more than likely. I can never promise these days, but I'm trying. All right, have a good night, everybody. Peace.